stage is set for something to take over the crown. The throne, once Game of Thrones has ended. But what will do it? Which show coming down the pipeline, which fantasy world that's trying so hard to take up that mantle will succeed? In this video, I'm going to talk about which series has the best chance and why. And there are 4 that are certainly the front runners for me. We have Lord of the Rings coming down from Amazon with a crazy huge budget. We have Wheel of Time also coming down from Amazon, but we don't know a whole lot about that yet, except for some glimpses we've got from the showrunner, Rafe Judkins, and it honestly hasn't even been fully greenlit yet. We have the Kazmir being built, Brandon Sanderson's massive universe. And finally, we have The Witcher, which we've had some casting announcements for, and I'm predicting Netflix is putting a lot of eggs in that basket. But which of these 4 will come out on top and why? I'm gonna rate each one on a scale of 1 to 10 for potential, and I'll let you know my reasoning for each. And we're gonna start out first with Lord of the Rings. Now, there's pretty much a guarantee if this show is done well, Amazon will see a great return on investment, and it will have a large audience. But will it have as large an audience as Game of Thrones? I don't think so. The reasoning for this being, people who like Game of Thrones are very into it for the character and political drama, as well as the very dark, gritty world. Those aspects really stirred up headlines and got people talking, and the series spread like wildfire. The Lord of the Rings movies had large audiences, but The Hobbit much less so. And those movies certainly left a little bit of a bad taste in people's mouths. Moving into this show, Amazon is heavily banking on a name, bringing them in a large audience to then prove themselves with a high quality product. And they're throwing a large amount of money at it, which is actually a very good sign. It takes a big budget to have a big fantasy show work. $500 million for the first season is no joke. That being said, there's still a big risk here, and I don't think it'll draw as many eyes as some would think. One, Lord of the Rings has been done before, and they've already said this is not the typical Lord of the Rings story. It's actually going to be a prequel, is at least the rumor I have heard, which is pulling away from what Tolkien wrote, which for the diehard fans could be taken minorly offensively. Everything Tolkien wrote, for right or wrong, is largely considered like the Bible of fantasy. You have the most hardcore, devoted followers to his works, and if you just pull something that's Middle Earth and don't exactly do a great job with the story, you risk massively offending your original base, the people who you're counting on for spreading the word of your series and having it grow. This was done kind of well with the Shadow of Mordor games. I thought it was a decent story, and the second one did a okay job with a follow-up, though I think they both had fairly disappointing endings. But that's a video game. The storytelling standards are a lot lower. For something to be on par with Lord of the Rings, the things that Tolkien himself wrote, they need to be extraordinary. And the Hobbit movies left a really bad taste and a lot of distrust in Tolkien fans' mouths. And for Amazon to come out swinging, they need to set the bar for themselves high. Do I think they will do a good job? Yes. Do I think the audience that will be big enough will be there? Not so much. I think it'll be decent size. In fact, I could even think it'll be big enough to make the show overall a success. But it will not be the staggering, insane numbers that Game of Thrones pulls in. I think it'll just be good. I'm giving Lord of the Rings on that scale of 1 to 10 a solid 7. It'll succeed, it'll make them money, but it won't be the new king of fantasy returning Lord of the Rings to the top. The original stories are done, the last attempt didn't go too well, and Amazon seems to be thinking they can buy their way into success, and the fans might just be too turned off from seeing more Tolkien adaptations for it to have that initial boost it would need to reach that GOT status. Next, we're going to talk about Wheel of Time. This to me is the largest gamble with the highest return on investment. Wheel of Time, if done extraordinarily well, could easily take that Game of Thrones standard, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm biased. It's my favorite series. But that being said, the world, character, politics, backstabbing, and darker undertones are all there to slip right into that Game of Thrones audience and honestly grow it to even larger. I think Wheel of Time has a bit more appeal for some of the people who are turned off by just how extraordinarily dark Game of Thrones could be. That, coupled with a very flashy magic system, the Chosen One arc that draws in audiences, and Amazon hopefully giving out another huge budget that would actually make all these things work, could float Wheel of Time to the top or even beyond where Game of Thrones has sat. But I think it has the least chance of doing that. I am actually very nervous for this show. I think it's way more likely to just be good and not hit that great status. And if Wheel of Time is just good, you're going to really disappoint some fans who are looking for that Game of Thrones level, and they're not going to get it. You're not going to see the excitement around the show, which it may or may not deserve. I don't think it'll have that growth potential that you really need to have those Game of Thrones numbers. Game of Thrones didn't debut with the numbers it has now. It was through word of mouth and just people being blown away by what they saw that inflated it to where it sits now. Wheel of Time needs to recapture that word of mouth. People telling each other, you won't believe what happened, how they did it, or just the quality of the show. And because Game of Thrones already raised the bar, they need to raise the bar higher with this larger world, deeper cultures, and more complex magic system, as well as embrace some great actors to bring these characters who the fans know intimately to life. So if they do it great, they put the time and money in, Wheel of Time has the potential to be something huge. But I think it's way more likely to land into that 6 level. And there's a slim chance it could fall into the lower 3 or even 2 and be an utter failure, though I think that's just as likely as the perfect. I think we're way more likely to see it fall in the middle as well, and probably be canceled before the last season, because we need to hang on through so many seasons to tell this story. It would have to succeed at that higher level to get all the way to the end, and I think there's a high chance of cancellation, unfortunately. It's just my honest take on everything I've seen. Oh, I want to make the additional point, I don't think this is due to creative talent. The showrunners I've seen so far have nothing but a ton of love for the series. This really just comes down to budget. Once the budget for Wheel of Time is announced and it's around $100 million per season, then I'll have way more faith the show will be great. Next we have Kazmir, something that could hook people with the same kind of MCU appeal of having cross-world hints and Easter eggs slowly building to something that even the books haven't got to or may never get to. What this means is there's a lot of mystery, and if played very well, could really grow into something amazing. That being said, I think this is least likely to succeed. I'm sorry, Brandon, but seeing the writers who have already been tagged, the studios involved, I do not have a lot of faith for the Kazmir being adapted very well. I think the Kazmir could go through what some other fantasy stuff has gone through, being adapted poorly, and then hopefully in the future being adapted well. Because for the Kazmir to really be captured, you need huge budgets. But with the studios and writers involved, I don't think that's realistic for what we're going to see. Even the smaller Brandon books, which they could start off with, probably wouldn't generate the excitement they need to get the return on investment, so the next time around they could have a bigger budget and do something like Stormlight Archive. They might accidentally float in mediocrity, and in the TV world, floating in mediocrity leads to failure. You have to be good to even stand on your legs, especially when it comes to fantasy adaptations, and I think Kazmir is going to crumble. It's just my prediction. I'm sorry, guys. Next up, we have The Witcher, and fortunately, this is the one that I think is most likely to succeed. Netflix has had some real hits and is willing to experiment. Granted, they've had their fair share of failures, but with Witcher, I get the vibe they're putting a lot of eggs in these baskets, casting a big name like Henry Cavill and hyping it up in the media a good bit. They've had some backlash from fans, but it seems very undeserved for me, and I have good faith that this is one of the shows Netflix is going to take a lot of time and care with. Normally Netflix kind of just pushes things out as a surprise, but I get the feeling they're really working hard here. Witcher also has the advantage of just naturally kind of having that Game of Thrones vibe. It's grimdark fantasy to its core. So Game of Thrones fans could latch onto it and switch right over after their show ends. I think this could result in The Witcher being huge. The video games are well known and loved. The books are well known and massively loved. They have a huge fan base that'll probably avidly spread the word, even if the show's just good. A big name like Henry Cavill's already going to pique people's interest who don't know the games or the books. They have a big audience drag already. They just need to be good enough to keep that binge watch appeal Netflix is known for to be a big success. Netflix has a huge number of subscribers, and it could reach those Game of Thrones numbers. I'm very willing to believe that. And on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm putting Witcher at a solid 8 to 9 in terms of success. As long as they understand their source material and do it justice, and after doing some more research, it seems Henry Cavill is a big fan of this series and is likely going to pour his heart into this role. I have faith, I really do. I think this could be something that's great and elevate the series as a whole.
But wait, there's one more.
Dark Tower is also coming in. And do I think the Dark Tower series by Stephen King has the potential to match or overtop Game of Thrones? No, I don't. Sorry, I know there's Dark Tower fans on my channel, and I like the series, but it's just too weird. Stephen King's writing is too bizarre to ever have that big of an appeal to hit the Game of Thrones crown and take the throne. It's just not going to happen to it. I'm only being realistic. King's writing style is way too strange and off-putting to a lot of people for it to be adapted well enough to have a mass appeal and appease the fans. If you weren't a fan of the books and went in and watched the recent movie, it was just an okay action movie and had maybe some appeal. But if you were a fan, you were probably incredibly turned off because it wasn't loyal to the source material at all and you hated it. Try to think of a reasonable middle ground between the two, and I don't think you can bridge the gap here. I don't think Dark Tower has the potential to be big enough appeal to grab that large an audience. With Stephen King's writing style and the unfortunate things he says sometimes.
Whenever he depth charged someone, for that was how he always thought of it, as depth charging, he came in his pants. The baggy sweatshirt also covered the wet spot, which invariably formed on his jeans.
It's why even like the recent movie It was actually fairly different from the source material in pretty drastic ways, especially the ending. And overall, I'm giving the Dark Tower a 4 out of 10. I think it might be good. It could either change itself quite a bit from the source material and be good enough to gain a following that way, though I think that would be difficult, or be true enough to the source material that it keeps its book following, and that's large enough to propel it forward for a while. But those entities are too far apart, in my opinion, to ever bridge that gap. Anyway, that's just my take on the plethora of series that are coming down the pipeline. I could be way off base, I probably am, and I'm nothing but excited to see these fantasy worlds be done justice. In a perfect world, all of them will be wonderful, though I really doubt that'll happen. Anyway, guys, let me know what world you're most looking forward to seeing brought to the screen, whether it's by Amazon, Netflix, or whoever, and why. Is it also your favorite book, or you just think this world would be good to adapt? Let me know down in the comments below. I'll be in there for a while. Like and subscribe if you have not already, and hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.